So the Middle East is going to hell. Actually, it's not quite fair. It was pretty hellish already. It's just digging deeper, finding lower levels of hell. The news overnight is that the Syrian dictatorship, which is backed by Iran, and the terrorist group Hezbollah, used chemical weapons against Syrian rebels who are led by al-Qaeda and its affiliates, and who are backed by Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and Barack Hussein Obama. It's tough to get accurate facts, but this chemical attack is alleged to have killed up to 2,000 people. Here, let's take a look into hell, or if you'd rather not, come back in a minute.
الله أكبر الغوطة الشرقية حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل الله أكبر الله أكبر استهداف حجوبر مواد كيميائية الله أكبر.
Chemical weapons are awful because they seem so unnatural and diabolical and clearly have no other purpose other than to kill and maim in brutal and painful ways, and because they're so indiscriminate. They kill soldiers and civilians, men, women, and children equally. Actually, they're likely to kill the young and the old and the weak more than they kill strong fighting men. But really, does it even matter if you're killed by a chemical or by a bullet? Dead is dead. And watching the Middle East these days is a reminder of what total civilizational collapse looks like. It's not just Syria, of course. This is a video from Egypt a week ago when the Muslim Brotherhood was at war with the Egyptian military, and the Salafists were at war with both of them. Watch a truck being pushed off a bridge with the cops inside, obviously being killed. Look, Iran and the United States are backing the Muslim Brotherhood. Saudi Arabia is backing the Egyptian military. And according to the CBC, Toronto Star, and CTV, a good, honest, hard-working, loving man from Toronto, like Amr Mohammed Qasim, decided to go to Egypt right now for his vacation and just happened to get caught up in the arson and riots there too. I wonder if he had a little maple leaf on his backpack while on his vacation in Egypt. Anyways, what about Libya? It's not just Syria and Egypt. Libya was so proud that Canada contributed 500 troops from our Navy and Air Force to help al-Qaeda take out Muammar Gaddafi. Here's how our coalition allies there finished off the job for us. So proud. Can you see that? Like, are you confused by all of this? Of course you are, because it is confusing. No one is not confused by this. It is a revolution that's spreading. The Arab Spring has gone viral, but it is not the virus of freedom like the one that swept through the former Soviet Union, toppling tyrants across the Warsaw Pact and leaving democracies in their wake in all but a few cases. It's the virus of Islamic fascism. Fascism is on the mark. We don't use the phrase Islamo-Nazis a lot because it sounds forced or weird, but in fact the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the main antagonist in Egypt, dates back to the 1920s, and they had a formal and friendly alliance with Hitler's Nazis. And they never renounced that. Palestinian terrorists have their own roots in Nazi warfare as well. Here are some pictures of the chief Palestinian leader of Jerusalem during the 1940s, whose name was Haj Amin al-Husseini. He met with Hitler and with the head of the SS, Himmler. Haj Amin al-Husseini recruited thousands of Muslim soldiers for the Nazi army. He went on radio in Berlin and called for all Arabs and Muslims to rise up around the world and join the Nazis in killing the Jews. So yeah, Islamic fascism, it's not new, it's just flared up again. Back in the 1940s, we fought against it. They were on the side of the Nazis and we were on the side of the Allies. But today, Barack Obama, and to a lesser extent us here in Canada, are on the side of the Islamic fascists. We're on the Islamic fascist side in Syria, aren't we? Allied with al-Qaeda. We're on the Islamic fascist side in Egypt, aren't we? Allied with the Muslim Brotherhood, just like Hitler was. We're on the Islamic fascist side in Libya. We helped al-Qaeda get rid of Gaddafi, who had already shut down his nuclear program and had paid billions in reparations to his terrorist victims in Europe. Weirdly, Vladimir Putin, the authoritarian bully leader of Russia, it's crazy to say this, but he's with the less evil side in each of these three fights I just mentioned. Now, let me be clear, there is no good guy here. Just degrees of bad guys. And in all three of these cases, Syria, Egypt, Libya, Russia is on the side of the less bad guys than we are. That's weird. And unfortunately, that's what choices are like in the real world of politics. Unlike the fall of the Soviet Union, there are no liberal Democrats waiting in the wings in each of these Arab countries. Like Lech Walesa, the Solidarity Movement in Poland, or Václav Havel in Czechoslovakia. There just aren't any Arabs like that in these countries. So part of being a national leader, dealing with real-life decisions instead of just academic debates, is to choose amongst real-life options. That's for Barack Obama and Putin and our own Stephen Harper to do. So who do you think Stephen Harper should prefer? Bashar Assad, who just gassed 2,000 of his people? or his enemies, Al-Qaeda? Who do you prefer, a soldier dictatorship in Egypt or a Muslim Brotherhood dictatorship? Sorry, you have got to choose. Now, looking at the videos of these terrible places and the violence reminds me of what the political philosopher Thomas Hobbes wrote about 350 years ago in a book called Leviathan. He said that without structures to govern us, without a civilization over us, mankind descends into what he called a war of all against all. Yeah, isn't that exactly what's happening to about 1 billion people now, from North Africa through the Middle East, out to Iran and even further east? A war of all against all, mainly between different Muslim sects, but spilling into non-Muslim countries too, of course, as 9/11 showed us. Here, let me read you a few sentences of Leviathan, because he was writing about the chaos of barbarian Europe, but it applies to all mankind. Does it not apply to the Middle East today in the sadly named Arab Spring? Let me quote, "In such condition, there is no place for industry, because the fruit thereof is uncertain, and consequently no culture of the earth, no navigation, nor use of the commodities that may be imported by sea, no commodious building, no instruments of moving and removing such things as require much force, no knowledge of the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and, which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death in the life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short." Oh, exactly. Now, here in the Free West, we talk about things every day like economic growth and investment and skills training and blah, blah, blah. Our entire political vocabulary, our entire social thinking is based on a secure future. Our personal security, the security of our property and our money and our homes and our businesses. Not a future of lawless mobs running rampant and killing everybody. So how did this happen? I mean, the Middle East has always been an awful place to be, other than that one tiny liberal democracy in the middle of it called Israel. But the Middle East was never this bad, at least in modern times, right? Now, the title of the book, Leviathan, refers to Hobbes' answer. He believes that in return for social peace, not so much freedom, just some peace and an end to the constant ravages of barbaric war, that every person must enter into what he calls a social contract with a giant power called the state. In what he calls a social contract, individuals give up their violence and autonomy to the state, and in return, the state will protect them. Look at the cover page of his book. Look at that giant man, the size of a mountain, who will protect the country. That's the Leviathan. If you can see it, it's actually made up of lots of little people. That's the idea of the Leviathan, really a giant person made up of all of us who will protect all of us. Of course, such a giant, powerful state would tend to crush civil liberties too, but for the 2,000 people killed last night in Syria, my guess is that they'd be willing to trade away some civil liberties, at least in the short term, just to stop the war. And in fact, that's what life was like in much of the Middle East until the Arab Spring. The Leviathans were tyrants, as you might expect, usually military dictators. Egypt's military dictator, until he was deposed about 2 years ago, was in power for 30 years. He was like a sphinx. In fact, they called him a pharaoh. A dictator, for sure. A corrupt kleptocrat, but of course. A liberal, hell no. But he kept the peace treaty with Israel and stayed on America's side and helped keep the Muslim Brotherhood terrorists at bay. He was Egypt's Leviathan. And you must acknowledge that under his rule, there was no war of all against all. Libya's Gaddafi was in power for more than 40 years. Weird and eccentric, of course. Corrupt, more than most. Violent, yeah, a leading terrorist leader until the United States attacked him under Ronald Reagan, and then George Bush so scared him by invading Iraq that Gaddafi defected back to our side as far as a dictator could go. A Democrat, hell no. But under his rule, there was never a 400-man terrorist attack on a U.S. consulate in Benghazi like there has been since his ouster, has there been? Or take Hafez Assad. He ruled Syria with an iron fist for nearly 30 years. His most brutal moment was in 1982 when the Muslim Brotherhood had a rebellion against him. Now, he drove these terrorists into the town of Hama. He surrounded it and pummeled it with artillery for weeks. Just blew the place up. Up to 40,000 people were killed, men, women, and children. But it ended the civil war for 30 years. Until the Arab Spring came. Bashar Assad took over from his father. That's a neat trick, eh? Just inheriting a country from your dad. And he's been just as brutal as his dad, more even. His dad put down the last Islamic rebellion for good with 40,000 deaths. Bashar and his Iranian and Russian allies has far exceeded that number, and the rebels have killed plenty too, and the war's not done. But do you see what I mean about Arab strongmen being the personal incarnation of Leviathan, intervening to stop the great war of all against all? Even Saddam Hussein had the same role for nearly 25 years, and in fact, for much of that time, he was considered a U.S. ally, especially in helping to contain Iran's Ayatollah. Saddam was brutal, and he used chemical weapons against Marsh Arabs and against Kurds, and of course he invaded other countries like Kuwait. It was a dictatorship too. But my point is that under him, Iraq was not a war of all against all, with suicide bombs going off in the street corners every week as they are now, and with different armed factions fighting in the streets as they are now. It was no liberal country, but neither was it a bloody civil war. The West needed Saddam to help counter Iran because it fell into an Islamic terrorist revolution. But until that Iranian revolution, it had been run by the Shah of Iran, a dictator, yes, but a benign dictator, a moderate Muslim who was allied with the West, who pursued a policy of modernization, and who even had economic relations with Israel. Not a liberal democracy, but a stable country and a Western ally, and a place where normal people, including minorities like Jews, could live without having their homes burnt down, like in Cairo these days. Now, I'm almost done. There's Jordan. It's probably the most moderate of the Arab countries right now. It has a peace treaty with Israel. It is a dictatorship, but not a totalitarian one. For 46 years, the country was ruled by King Hussein. He tried fighting with Israel a few times, joining in several Arab wars against it, but he kept losing. So he made peace, recognizing Israel's right to exist in the 1990s. Hussein probably didn't need the extra enemy. After all, he's a Hashemite, and the majority of his population are Palestinians. And Islamic extremists would love nothing more than have a little Arab Spring to take out Jordan, too. They tried that. In 1970, Yasser Arafat's PLO launched a civil war in Jordan. So King Hussein killed 5,000 of them and exiled the PLO and its leadership. You can imagine how Jordan would feel if the PLO were ever given their own failed state in the West Bank just across the river from Jordan. Yeah, they'd love that. Now, Hussein was succeeded by his son. Isn't that neat? Like a corner store changing its name from Bob's to Bob and Son or something, except that it's owning a country, not a corner store. Like I say, these people are not liberals, they're not Democrats, but they have kept the peace. And until a Jordanian democratic movement emerges that's stronger than the Islamic fascist movement that is surging right now, frankly, that is the best you are going to do in Jordan. Last country, Saudi Arabia and their brutal King Abdullah. Saudi Arabia, the only country in the world to actually be named after the family that owns it, the Saud family. Saudi Arabia, a fake country, really, a company, really, a family business, but not even a business, more like a mosque with oil pumps. I mean, his formal title isn't even king or president for life. It's custodian of the two holy mosques, as in that's where Mecca and Medina are. That's his title. The Saudi royal family lives a life of obscene luxury and indulgence, but they promote an extremist form of Islam called Wahhabi Islam for every other Muslim in the world, including here in Canada. They fund over 1,000 extremist mosques around the world. It's a bargain they've made. Pay off the extremists so they'll only attack other countries. But of course, not every Muslim extremist can be bought off, so the Saudis are constantly at risk of being overthrown too. And in some ways, they'd be the easiest, since they're really just a corporation of a few thousand princes sitting on top of a desert of oil. Most of the population in Saudi Arabia aren't even Saudi. They're foreign indentured workers brought in like slaves on a plantation just to work to keep the Saudis rich. My point here is to take you through the Arab and Muslim world, to show you how crummy it is, how crummy and undemocratic, but how, for 2 generations, the peace has been kept by extremely durable dictators, usually with a military pedigree. They were bastards. But during the Cold War, we tried to make them our bastards, not the Soviets. We flipped Egypt from being a Russian ally to being on our side. We slowly maneuvered Israel's enemies into being, well, not enemies, but maybe not attackers. Now, the strategy didn't always work. Iran was a disaster in the Iraq-Kuwait war, probably avoidable had Saddam not misjudged the Western response to his war. But on the whole, the Middle East didn't burn like it's burning now. So what the hell went wrong? How did it turn so bad so quickly? I mean, the fall of the Soviet Union didn't unravel the Middle East. It made it easier to find a solution, especially as Russia and Israel established ties, strengthened by 1 million Russian immigrants going to Israel. Even after 9/11, the Middle East wasn't roiled by riots like it is today. In fact, 9/11 scared some Arab countries closer to the West, caused Libya to give up its nuclear program, for example. So what happened? Why did it all fall to hell in the past few years? What changed now that didn't unseat these Leviathans in earlier decades? I would never have wanted to live in Arab or Muslim countries over the past 50 years. At best, they were authoritarian and undemocratic, benign dictators who were paranoid about political dissent. At worst, they were run by eccentric tyrants like Gaddafi or Saddam and his sons, who had a cruel streak and a persecution of ethnic minorities. But there was not the war of all against all. It was like these countries were ruled by the giant stone-faced sculptures on Easter Island, you know, unmovable, unkind, but reliable in their stoniness. There wasn't freedom in Arabia, but there was order. So what the hell happened? Barack Hussein Obama happened. That's what happened. He unleashed all of this in a keynote speech he made in Cairo in 2009. And after the break, I will prove that to you. Don't move a muscle. Barack Obama, like most fashionable liberals, thought that George W. Bush was a crude cowboy, a Christian crusader, an ignoramus, someone who lacked nuance or sophistication, a warmonger, someone who stepped on toes of other nations and other religions and other ethnicities, someone who had lowered America's prestige around the world. Obama never lacked self-confidence. Here he was campaigning in 2008. It's hilarious because of the King Canute-style promise he makes here about sea levels falling. But listen to his other promises too. Not really promises, but statements about how awesome he is and will be, and how powerful he is and will be. Look at this.
Generations from now, we will be able to look back and tell our children that this was the moment when we began to provide care for the sick and good jobs to the jobless. This was the moment when the rise of the oceans began to slow and our planet began to heal. This was the moment when we ended a war and secured our nation and restored our image as the last best hope on earth.
Well, actually, unemployment is up. Ended a war? Yeah, not really. But how about the promise of improving America's reputation, especially in Muslim countries? It was going to be his centerpiece, not just of his foreign policy, but of all his policy. For example, he stopped using the word terrorism and ordered his administration to do so too. He made Muslim outreach a priority for government agencies that never had anything to do with religion before. Here's an interview on Al Jazeera by Obama's NASA chief, Charles Bolden.
My first question to you is, why are you here in the region?
Oh, I appreciate you asking the question. I'm here in the region. It's sort of the first anniversary of President Barack Obama's visit to Cairo and his speech there when he gave what has now become known as Obama's Cairo Initiative, where he announced that he really wanted this to be a new beginning of the relationship between the United States and the Muslim world. When I became the NASA administrator, or before I became the NASA administrator, he charged me with three things. One was he wanted me to help re-inspire children to want to get into science and math. He wanted me to expand our international relationships. And third, and perhaps foremost, he wanted me to find a way to reach out to the Muslim world and engage much more with dominantly Muslim nations to help them feel good about their historic contribution to science and engineering.
That's incredible. But note what Bolden said. It was all part of Obama's Muslim master plan to bring the Arab world on side and heal the world after George W. Bush wrecked it. Bolden referred to Obama's key foreign policy speech, his first major speech after becoming president. Obama didn't come to Canada, his closest ally and neighbor and trading partner. He didn't go to China, the rising power. He didn't go to Europe. He went to Cairo, the largest Arab city in the world. He gave a speech in which he deliberately introduced himself using his middle name, Barack Hussein Obama, and he emphasized his Muslim upbringing. Remember, both his dad and his stepdad were Muslim, and he went to a Muslim school in Indonesia. Obama thought he could woo the Muslim world the same way he wooed America, through speeches, through the teleprompter. He was so sure of the power of his speech-making, of his own personal charisma and power of persuasion, that he thought that's all that had been missing in history to solve the world's most vexing problems like Middle East peace and a lack of freedom over there. So this speech was given great prominence. It was given a grandiose title, A New Beginning. The White House uploaded the video online and translated it into more than a dozen other languages, from Chinese to Arabic to Russian to the Iranian language of Persian. It was important, extremely important, because in that speech, Obama outlined actually the greatest shift in U.S. foreign policy since the Second World War. And it is my contention today that the disaster in the Middle East, the epicenter of which is Cairo, the same city in which Obama gave that speech in 2009, is directly linked to Obama's speech and what he said and how it was understood by Muslims and Arabs and indeed by Vladimir Putin and the Ayatollahs and the Chinese, who helpfully had the White House translate it for him. Here, let's go through that speech now. I'll prove it to you. Obama correctly assessed a tension between Muslim countries and the free West. But what caused that tension? What was the problem? Obama had an answer that no American president had ever before suggested. Look.
Tension has been fed by colonialism that denied rights and opportunities to many Muslims, and a Cold War in which Muslim majority countries were too often treated as proxies without regard to their own aspirations.
Hang on, so Obama blamed colonialism as in European empires that used to own Arabia, but that ended last century. Is Queen Victoria to blame for denying rights to Muslims and Arabs today? Is that what's causing the tension between Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood and America today? Is that why Osama bin Laden did what he did on 9/11? Are dead white men from a century ago to blame for the fact that there is no free speech in Arabia today? Why? Was there free speech in Arabia before the British or French came there? Could you imagine being part of the Muslim Brotherhood and sitting there and hearing an American president disparage the West and Western history and blaming the West for the tension, not Muslim fanatics like the Muslim Brotherhood? Oh, we're just getting started. Here's a good one. Look at this.
I've come here to Cairo to seek a new beginning between the United States and Muslims around the world, one based on mutual interest and mutual respect, and one based upon the truth that America and Islam are not exclusive and need not be in competition. Instead, they overlap and share common principles, principles of justice and progress, tolerance, and the dignity of all human beings.
Well, in a war, even a Cold War, even the new Cold War between those who want Sharia law versus those who want liberal democracy, it is our differences that are important. That's why there is a war. It's good to emphasize areas of commonality, as he tried to do, but you can't just brush over 9/11 or the reasons for it as elocuted by Osama bin Laden. One side in a war can't unilaterally pretend that the war isn't on. But fine, it was a reset-style speech. But look at the values Obama wanted to highlight: respect, tolerance, dignity. Now those are feelings. Those are emotional states. Now, that's great for winning the Democratic primary, and it obviously won him the U.S. election. But is America's lack of respect for Arabia really the whole problem in the world? Or did he mean that he could simply convince Arabs to respect America? He wanted to play social worker or therapist or Oprah Winfrey. He wanted to end the competition between America and Arabia, but there is no competition. Our Western system works better. We're richer, we're freer, we're happier, we're more peaceful, not just for Christians or Jews, but for the millions of Muslims who have fled here to the West. So what did he mean? Respect. But respect what? Respect Arab dictatorships? Respect theocracies? Respect their poverty, their lack of economic accomplishment? Who knows? But the Muslim Brotherhood took his measure. Here was an unserious man. You'll note Obama didn't mention one value. He didn't mention freedom. It was a very long speech, and he barely mentioned the concept. But listen how he did raise the issue.
Freedom in America is indivisible from the freedom to practice one's religion. That is why there is a mosque in every state in our union and over 1,200 mosques within our borders. That's why the United States government has gone to court to protect the right of women and girls to wear the hijab and to punish those who would deny it.
So he's really revved up about freedom and demanding freedom. But only in the United States, in the freest country in the world, where freedom of religion is the very first section of the Bill of Rights. And he talks about suing for the freedom of women to cover their faces. I love how he mispronounces hijab. Anyway, he's in Cairo, in Egypt, where the Coptic Christian minorities are regularly persecuted. Churches are burned. Christians are killed. And he tells them that America has to improve its tolerance and he has to sue for more tolerance to to let women put on a face-obscuring mask? How about the freedom for Muslim women not to be forced to wear a hijab, as happens in the Arab world? Again, what do you think a Muslim Brotherhood activist thought of this speech? Do you think that Obama's inversion of blame, his self-accusatory language, not telling Arabia to get their act together, but blaming America, don't you see the direct line between this and the recent Kristallnacht, the torching of Egyptian churches? Next clip.
Regardless of race, religion, or station in life, all of us share common aspirations: to live in peace and security, to get an education and to work with dignity, to love our families, our communities, and our God. These things we share. This is the hope of all humanity.
There you have it again, our common aspirations. But no mention of the words freedom or liberty. How can you do that? How can you be an American president, the leader of the free world, talking about your aspirations and not mention freedom? Do you think that omission was not noticed by the audience? That America no longer cared about freedom? He's speaking in a dictatorship. That America was no longer trying to light the lamps of liberty and really didn't care if they were snuffed out, so long as they could, what's his phrase, get an education and work with dignity. Oh, the Muslim Brotherhood has big plans for education and dignity, don't they? This speech did not rebuke them. It confirmed their plans. Next clip.
Unlike Afghanistan, Iraq was a war of choice that provoked strong differences in my country and around the world. Although I believe that the Iraqi people are ultimately better off without the tyranny of Saddam Hussein, I also believe that events in Iraq have reminded America of the need to use diplomacy and build international consensus to resolve our problems whenever possible.
So there's a grudging acknowledgement that Saddam was a tyrant and that the war was good, but an eager statement that America wouldn't have gone to war against him or others like him if Obama was in charge. Instead, he'd agree to be tied up in the UN forever. Iran has followed this suggestion perfectly, haven't they? They love the UN and they've tied Obama up. Here's more. Next clip.
9/11 was an enormous trauma to our country. The fear and anger that it provoked was understandable. But in some cases, it led us to act contrary to our traditions and our ideals. We are taking concrete actions to change course. I have unequivocally prohibited the use of torture by the United States, and I have ordered the prison at Guantanamo Bay closed by early next year.
That is the Obama Cairo doctrine right there. That is the blueprint for Egypt's riots right there. That is the green light for Muslim Brotherhood uprisings across Arabia, for Islamic terrorists from Libya to Syria to Yemen, right there. Democracy is controversial, says Obama. He sounds embarrassed, doesn't he? He's on an apology tour. He is crystal clear he will not try to promote freedom anymore. Not like that cowboy Bush did. That would be imposing America's will. He wants to unilaterally disarm American foreign policies to let only Iran or Russia or China impose their will on Arabia. America will lead from behind, if at all. Look at how he defines democracy. Hey, whatever works for you, Sharia elections, as in one election, one time, forever, and then the glory of Sharia law for eternity. No problem. That's how the Muslim Brotherhood has done it in Gaza. That line, America does not presume to know best. It was heard as, America will not fight for freedom. America will not stop the march of Islamic fascism. America will not lead. America will not block tyrants. America will certainly not even stand by its own allies, however authoritarian they may have been, if there is a revolt. So read the speech. Watch the whole thing online. Don't think of it as, don't watch it like you would watch it as a low information Democrat voter in Chicago. Watch it as if you were a savvy, cold-blooded Muslim Brotherhood terrorist in Cairo who had been waiting patiently for decades to seize power. You're listening to a president of the United States denounce the West, ignore freedom, validate Hamas, a terrorist group, and promise non-intervention. That, my friends, is what toppled all of those Easter Island monoliths from Muammar Gaddafi to Hosni Mubarak. That is who lit the arson of the Arab Spring. I do not know if that is the new beginning that Barack Obama wanted, but I know it's the new beginning that he created.